Go ahead.
All right. So thank you all for being with us today. For our early college faculty who are joining us as part of our monthly touchpoint meetings, thank you for joining us today. For those who are not early college faculty and are part of our general faculty or from other departments, thank you also for joining us. Today with us, we have Dr. Adam Lawler, Vice President of Neurodiversity and Research and Innovation at Landmark College. Our focus will be our neurodivergent world, neurodiversity and neurodivergence in the modern classroom. So thank you again for being with us, Adam, and I'm going to hand it off to you.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me to talk to today and to talk in May. It's really exciting for me to be working with folks who are frankly right in my backyard. I mean, being a resident of Hatfield and Northampton, yes, I said both of them because my property spans that line and I get the privilege of paying taxes in two towns. But I'm just right down the road. So I know a number of folks, a number of students in my local community who go to STCC each year. So it's really a privilege for me to get to work with all of you. Today, I'm going to be talking about neurodiversity and neurodivergence. For folks who are just getting to know me for the first time, I had the privilege of serving as Vice President of Neurodiversity Research and Innovation at Landmark College. Landmark is located right over the border in Vermont, so just north of Brattleboro up 91. And if you're not familiar with Landmark, Landmark is certainly a specialized institution, being the first college ever to be solely for students who are neurodivergent, specifically students with learning disabilities, ADHD, and autism. I'm an educational psychologist, and my area of focus is squarely on post-secondary disability, with certainly an emphasis in neurodivergence. I'm a researcher and an author. One of my books came out in 2019, From Disability to Diversity, College Success for Students with Learning Disabilities, ADHD, and Autism Spectrum Disorder. And I have a new one coming out in 2025 called The New Accessibility in Higher Education. I identify as both neurodivergent and disabled, and I'll get into a little bit about what neurodivergent means. But I'm also the parent of two neurodiverse children and the spouse of a neurodivergent college administrator. So it's fair to say that I not only research this, but I live this day to day. So today, what we're going to be talking about is, again, neurodiversity and neurodivergence. And as really any good educator, I want to sort of lay out a path for us to take today. So if it's all right with folks, I'm going to talk a little bit about the agenda. So what I'm going to start with is really an introduction to neurodiversity and neurodivergence, and really, what I'm talking about when I use those terms. We'll then go into talking a little bit about why it's important. Why is it important to even know about these topics? We'll talk about frequent differences of neurodivergent people. We'll talk a little bit about the connection to the law, IEPs, and 504 plans. I'll then go in and I'll be honest with you, I'm just going to touch on some basic strategies for the classroom, because that's going to be a major focus of we're going to go into a lot of depth at the May workshop. And then finally, I'll leave some time for question and answer. So I have to say, in a webinar style presentation, it's a little difficult to take questions during the session, but please, as you think of questions, pop them in that Q&A, and I'll make sure I get to as many of them as I can with the remaining time. But don't keep them in your mind. Write them down, because I don't want you to forget. So with that, I'm just going to dive into talking a little bit about neurodiversity. Sorry, is my slide changing? Can folks see me changing
No,
my
it
slide?
isn't.
It's
You're on
not.
your Neurodivergent World, Neurodiversity and Divergence in the Modern Classroom, I think is your title page.
Yeah, I've been switching slides. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and try to go back. It was working when we tried it a moment ago. No, let's see. Slide one. We tried this at the beginning and it was working. So sorry about that. I thought, can folks see the Dr. Adam Layler slide?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, awesome. So I actually went through a couple of, just to show you, I was talking a little bit about myself, and then I actually showed you an agenda. So hopefully folks were riveted looking at that title slide. So what I'm going to go into now is talking a little bit about language. And the language, I mean, is honestly a confusing part of neurodiversity and disability. So, I mean, the first piece is to be or not to be disabled. Um, why is there a challenge with using the term disabled nowadays? Um, and I mean, the answer to that is, there's not really a problem using the term disabled. I mean, folks who are disabled, like myself, and identify as such, I mean, some of us like the term and some of us don't. Some folks will say, like myself, I like being called disabled because it connects me to a community of folks who really fought for my civil rights. And they crawled up the stairs of the Capitol building. They fought alongside with other civil rights activists. So I like that term. I use it myself. But other folks, I mean, frankly, don't like it within the community. They don't like that it is I mean, referential to folks that are quote unquote able. They don't like that it's been, I mean, a point of historical discrimination. So they like to embrace other terms, like talking about being neurodivergent, being they'll use the term dis in parentheses and with a capital A and call it disabled in that form. Um, the important thing to remember is that really you want to go by however people identify, because it is a personal identity. I mean, try to be respectful of their desires, but know that I mean, in public forum like this, I mean, you can make a choice, but also acknowledge the reason why you're using it. I'm using it in this context of this presentation um, as a form of respect. But I recognize that other folks have different preferences and opinions. So again, when it comes to talking with an individual person, I encourage you to use the terms that they prefer to be identified as. Also, there's a question of person first versus identity first language. And which one should we be using? Again, we're in a situation where there's differences amongst the community. Um, some folks like person first language, for example, a student with a disability, because they want to really identify the humanity of the person, recognize the individual before an identity label. In many cases, disabled has been a label applied to someone. They really want to respect the person first. Other folks, like myself, I tend to use identity first language. Actually, I use both of them, but I tend to more often use identity first language, um, in part just because disability, neurodivergence, I mean, is a part of me. I'm not with something. It's actually part of me that I see the world through in most interactions. Um, so, I mean, again, this is a matter of respecting the individual, but also having a rationale for why you might use particular language in publicly when talking with a larger group, and being able to explain why you're doing it and that you're doing it, regardless of what you use, you're doing it in a way that you want to respect people, and you're hoping that, first and foremost, that is what your people are receiving as part of your communications. So, it comes to the point of what is neurodiversity? I've used that term. And neurodiversity is both a biological fact and a socio-political movement. So it's really two things. In terms of it being a fact, neurodiversity refers to really the variation in brains and cognition, both physical structure as well as the way it operates. It sends neurochemical messages across neurons. And neurodiversity really talks about the unique ways in which humans have processed stimuli and how different people process it in slightly different ways. No two brains are alike. We always hear about, oh, the snowflake is the most unique thing, or the fingerprint. Well, honestly, those have somewhat been debunked. There are there are similarities and duplication, but the brain is unique. The brain, in its structure and the way it operates, is more unique than any snowflake or and what we have in neurodiversity really are oftentimes referred to as neurotypical brains or neurotypical people, and neurodivergent brains or neurodivergent. And these are different terms, and what they refer to is this idea of a social construction of what typical or normal is. And really it's not, we're not talking statistics. We're not talking the bell-shaped curve of where, statistically speaking, most or the typical brain would be within this standard deviation. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what society thinks of as being normative or typical. And what society thinks is normal and typical varies. Varies by culture. It varies by ethnicity. It varies by time. What we thought was typical today is probably very different than what it was 100 years ago. So the idea of typical or normative varies based on time, place, and situation. And when we're talking about neurotypical people, we're talking about those people that, they roughly fit in within what society has constructed as normal or typical. And neurodivergent people are those that fall outside of that rough approximation. And neurodivergent people are varied. Neurodivergent isn't just one type of person. Neurodivergent profiles include learning disability, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, autism, Tourette syndrome, mental health disabilities, intellectual disabilities, which at one point in some of our lives were referred to as mental retardation, term not typically used anymore, traumatic brain injuries or TBIs. But it also includes things like giftedness and high IQ. So, and many, many others. But one of the interesting things is when we're talking about neurodivergent, it is a neutral term. It's not something that's considered positive or negatively balanced. All it is that it's not in the norm. A lot of these profiles that are up here, society has for a long time viewed very negatively. And there's one on here, giftedness and high IQ, which has historically been viewed as very positive. Why is that? It's because of the way that society views the brain in today's day and age. But think back on early human existence. we didn't have writing. We didn't have reading. And so things like learning disabilities, they didn't exist um, because there was no reading to be done. There was no writing to be done, no math to be done. Um, I mean, the same thing can be said about ADHD. I mean, ADHD, I mean, if you think back of how it was in those ages, I mean, you have folks that are alert, folks that, are able to focus on multiple things simultaneously. So they could work on a project and also potentially be more aware of other things going on around them. So if a predator or an invading group of other people were coming in, they might be able to pick it up sooner than others. Similarly, they may have had the charisma, the ability, the gift of gab, as they say, and may have been able to command a group of people. And if they, lost attention or, were super active, that was considered, a lesser issue, similar to autism. I mean, imagine, having high degree of sensitivity to stimuli around you, and being able to feel when things were getting colder faster, or be able to discern when the seasonal changes in light were occurring. All those different things that due to hypersensitivity in those days weren't necessarily considered disabilities. They were considered a strength, or potentially even mysticism, depending on what it was. Um, so it's again, these ideas are very much culturally specific, temporally specific, and vary. So, I mean, also talking about neurodiversity, I mentioned it was a socio-political movement. And really, it's a movement that consists of neurodivergent people and allies, folks who are working for the idea of access, equity, inclusion, belonging, all the things that we talk a lot about in higher education for people, regardless of how their brain is formed, physical, or how it operates in terms of function. Um, it's very much a civil rights movement um, or a social justice movement, if you will. And it's comprised of a wide variety of people. Scholars, celebrities, politicians, business leaders, musicians, families, and many, many others. It's an important part of this neurodiversity movement. It is also the allies, folks who, see neurodiversity and neurodivergence as, really being important to our society and the value and the worth of all people, regardless of how their brain operates. But all this information is good, and it's interesting to know, but why is it important? Why is it important in the context of society and what we do in higher education? What it does is it expands this notion of what different is, or what divergent is, or atypical, what have you, and adjusts really this conversation to be one where, you know, people are people, and we all have areas of challenge that we face in day-to-day life, and we also all have areas of strength. And that's just a natural part of the human existence. We're all different. I don't have any type of learning disability related to mathematics, but I'll be honest with you, I stink at it. It's a challenge that I just naturally have. I am not good at it. Simultaneously, I have areas of strength in my ability to write. Um, my son is a dyslexic student, and he is really struggles with writing and reading. But I can tell you, he's the most voracious reader I've ever met in my entire life. He reads more books than in one summer than I have read in my entire life, probably. He also, can't write, to be honest, a coherent, accurately spelled, paragraph. He was writing about four sentences per essay at one point. Couldn't be read by his teacher. Couldn't be read by himself afterwards either, frankly. Um, but when he was given the opportunity to use speech to text to truly convey his thoughts in writing, he went from writing four incomprehensible sentences to 3 pages of high-level analysis about geothermal activity, and this is part of his diagnostic testing for dyslexia. It goes to show that an inability in one area does not necessarily equate to inability in others. Some colleagues of mine refer to some of these disabilities or neurodivergent profiles as being a single area of challenge in a sea of strength. And that's in many ways what it is. So, what else does neurodiversity offer that makes it important? It offers different skills and talents and abilities. Think about our society, how many different people and how many different skills it takes to make our society run. Neurodivergence really helps with that. It helps differentiate what we do in our world. It contributes to different perspectives and experiences. The fascinating thing that I found as a researcher over the years, and this is very much anecdotal, is that I have a lot of colleagues, and have read histories of lots of people, and a lot of us, really work towards in some unifying sense of the world. We try to make sense of things in the context of what we already know. It's fascinating that so many people that have been responsible for the truly paradigm shifting components of our world really have been neurodivergent. You think of the Edisons and the Einsteins. You think of the folks that are working on the margins of what we do. Some people say, why are they even studying that? That's so out there. And it becomes the thing that really changes the way we see the world. A lot of those folks are neurodivergent. Neurodiversity also reminds us of the importance of access, equity, and inclusion. And the importance of some of these students and learners and colleagues who, really have a tremendous amount of ability and strength. But, they might need something a little different to provide them access. They might need something presented in a different way. Sometimes it's just a different way of saying it. You could say it one way and you see someone's face and they haven't quite gotten it. So you say it in a different way and they got it perfectly. Sometimes it takes a different modality. You say something in verbal form and they need it in written form to truly understand. So it just keeps this idea of access, equity, and inclusion at the forefront. The other reason neurodiversity is important because I hope all of you live to a very ripe old age. And if you do so, I hope that one day you have the opportunity to be neurodivergent. Because neurodiversity is life. And we know that our brains are constantly changing. We know that, my memory, I'll be honest with you, I'm middle-aged and my memory is not quite what it used to be because it's changing. So we all have this potential and likelihood of being neurodivergent at some point in our life. So it's really a part of just who we are as a people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about neurodivergent profiles. And we'll talk a little bit about what may differentiate. Um, so, how common are cognitive disabilities, which really is neurodivergent profiles in the United States? Um, Research from 2018 that really breaks this down suggests that roughly 38% of US citizens report having one or more cognitive disabilities. But the important thing to remember is that this is report. It's not necessarily, all people with cognitive disability. Um, Remember that many of these cognitive disabilities um, go undisclosed. You have a population of neurodivergent people at STCC, and I guarantee you there are many more folks that choose not to disclose for one reason or another. They may not need accommodations, so there's not a necessity. They may be fearful of discrimination. They may not have a diagnosis. They may not know. And many folks don't get diagnosed until much later in life. I myself was not diagnosed until my early 30s. Some people are lucky to have more information earlier on in their lives, and some people, only need that information or find that information out later on. Um, it's also important to know that many of these cognitive disabilities co-occur with other types of disabilities. We know that there are folks who might have be learning disabled and also may be blind. We know that many folks who have disabilities also have experience depression, anxiety. And I can imagine living in a world with different forms of disabilities and constantly wondering about how I'm going to access a building or a service that I need access to. That's, anxiety is real. Um, Generally, when I'm talking about neurodivergence, however, I'm really thinking about three profiles: learning disabilities, ADHD, and autism, because that's what I work with. Those are the profiles I work with in terms of students. Um, so, when thinking about those, what are some differences that you might see in a neurodivergent student? You might see things like difficulty reading or regulating emotions. They might be easily distracted or having difficulty keeping to schedules and due dates. They may have challenges with executive function. Executive function is something that really cuts across neurodivergent profiles and cuts across humanity, frankly. Executive function really are those abilities to engage in higher order cognitive processes. This is the textbook definition that allow you to work toward a goal. So things like planning and organization and initiating something, or putting aside potential distractors or inhibition. Um, all these different things are really higher order processes that are not one area of the brain. They really require different parts of the brain to work in concert. And what we know is across all people, your executive function skills and the parts of your brain that control those are developing, and they change. They're plastic. So throughout your life, you have different. Your brain will change, and for most people, their brains are developing until at least the parts of the brain that control executive function are developing and maturing until about age 25. And from that point, there's sort of a plateau. And then as you get older, those parts of the brains change again, and some of your executive function skills become a little weaker. That's natural human existence. Um, But what we know about many neurodivergent profiles, ADHD, autism, and learning disabilities, is that there is a slight lag oftentimes in executive function skills and the development of those parts of the brain. So you might see that students who struggle to get started, or students who get really distracted by everything from pizza to parties to video games to crushes. I mean, what have you. Um, all these things are natural. Um, but I mean, a lot of those, are oftentimes considered challenges. I can debunk some of that in some ways because there are certainly folks might struggle with things like um, distraction. But at the same time, if you're able to pick up on changes in your environment, that could be a strength. If you're able to, if you're able to multitask really well, that could be considered a strength. Um, so, what are some other differences that might exist in neurodivergent they could be an excellent reader or a writer. They could have the ability to almost focus in some ways too well. They can hyper focus, which can be challenging if you're depending on the task you're trying to engage in. If you're trying to, if you need to write a term paper, but you're hyper focusing on a video game, probably not the best thing. However, if you're working on, a math, a calculus, problem, a proof, and you're hyper focusing there, that might be a real strength of yours. Um, Similar, looking at writing. If you are writing an essay and you're hyper focusing at the end on grammar and making sure that the editing is perfect, that might be a real benefit if you're working on an English assignment. Folks might also be creative or artistic, hardworking, intelligent. Many neurodivergent folks are particularly empathetic. They have a high degree of empathy, and they can understand the perspectives of other people, and that they try and they work to do. And while some neurodivergent people might struggle with auditory processing, others might be very strong in that area. So, an important thing to know about neurodivergence, regardless of what the label is, you could be dyslexic, you could be autistic, and you know what, your experience and your areas of strength and challenge might be very different from someone with the exact same diagnosis standing next to you. So there's as much difference between profiles or diagnoses as there is within. So how does this all connect to IEPs and 504 plans? I know that many folks are familiar with those and hear about those. Well, it comes down to, at first the law. Neurodivergence in the law, or disability in the law, if you will. In K-12 education, you have three primary laws that govern and relate to disability. Those are the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or the IDEA, the Americans with Disability Act, or the ADA, and related amendments, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. These laws, really ensure not only access to the educational environment, the K-12 educational environment, but IDEA goes one step further. It really guarantees the success and proficiency of students. It ensures that students will get, the services that they need to be and really have the greatest chances at success, and success is very different than access. Higher education, however, works with under only two laws. The Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act are the primary ones. And those two acts, as opposed to in direct comparison to IDEA, which doesn't exist in higher education, really focus on access. So making sure that everyone has access to the higher education environment, which includes learning and related services. Um, Now, you can be provided access to the educational environment. But what we don't do in higher education is ensure that you're going to be successful. Um, we do that in K-12 education. We're gonna make sure that you're successful there. But in higher education, what we are going to provide is access at a bare minimum. Some institutions go beyond access and might provide different services. For example, um, tutoring or coaching or social pragmatic support. But that's not required by the law. Those are considered beyond compliance. So taking a little bit of a look, a little bit more depth, in K-12 education, we provide IEPs or individualized education plans or programs, depending on where on the school that you're talking with. And what those provide are a special education for students or a free and appropriate public education in a least restrictive environment. So, they're individualized in nature. They are developed by a team that includes the family in determining what the student needs in order to learn and be successful in that learning. There are also Section 504 plans if a student is receiving educational services under the Rehabilitation Act. Those plans outline what the services are that the student gets. Students with a Section 504 plan generally are not getting special education. Some students that have IEPs also have 504 plans, in which case they would, but 504 plans alone don't provide special education. Section 504 plans will have the opportunity to provide accommodations, though, to students where they are getting access. It could be a screen reader, it could be just extra time, but they're not getting additional services or additional type of education or a modified education as part of that. In higher education, we do not give IEPs, we do not give 504 plans, we don't provide modifications, but we will provide accommodations for access. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, if Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act covers both K-12 education and higher education, why are there no 504 plans? And that's because they're not required within higher education. Some institutions will put together a plan of support, but they will not provide specific plans associated. But they will provide accommodations. So I want to get to, before we get to question and answers, I want to give a couple of strategies that I think are lower hanging strategies that you might be able to implement even before the end of this academic year. Some of these can be quick changes. Now, before I go into strategies, I just want to say that sometimes when people think of accessibility, they think you have to do everything all at once. And I can tell you from experience, that's the surest way to think. If you try to change absolutely everything in one fell swoop, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be, even if you have great intentions and you're really excited, it's a losing battle because you can never create a perfectly accessible classroom environment. But you know what you can do? You can make incremental change that builds on one another. accessibility is an iterative process of making improvements and adjustments and doing your best to reach as many students as you possibly can in accessible ways. Um, Doing one thing, making one change, a, a unit or a day is really something to be commended. It's a little bit more access than existed the day before. Now, certainly, your accessibility services office may give you information about providing an accommodation to a student, but you can take proactive measures that to provide access to students even without those accommodations. And you'll be surprised how many students you reach and how appreciative students are when things are just a little bit more accessible, regardless of whether or not the student has a disability or is neurodivergent. So classroom strategies. Now, this one comes from from universal design for learning, and really, incorporate multiple means of motivating and engaging students. So, not just, yeah, you can get a good grade by doing this, but why is what they're learning important? Connect it to something, to a reason. If you're learning college algebra, for example, if you're learning college algebra, yeah, it's good to get a good grade, but you know what? It's also good because it'll help you balance, manage your finances, personal finances. If you get a job, you'll have to do a little bit of inventory or budget management. All those different things are skills that really rely on algebra. So connecting it to why it's important and making that explicit can be really helpful. Um, Provide different ways of communicating information. And oftentimes we'll communicate information verbally, or we'll communicate it in a written form. How about providing it in both for students who might be more attuned to understanding oral information versus those auditory information, I should say, versus those who are attuned to really needing it more visual. Same thing with assessment. How can we provide choice in assessment so that students can best demonstrate what they've learned? That certainly that meets the learning objective. I think about students who, some of them are really strong writers, and they can write you an essay on in World War II, for example. And then some students are just not great writers, even if they don't, have a writing related disability. But you know what? They can talk your ear off with really good information about World War II that will meet the same learning objective. The goal is to find a rubric that can measure both and provide the opportunity for them to do that, show you what they've learned. Now, certainly, if you're an English instructor and you're teaching a form of writing, writing is part of that learning objective. So I'm not saying to do something different, but there are some areas, if it's critical analysis or thematic analysis within text, that may not require a writing element. It might be something that they can do verbally. And we'll discuss more about this in the May 14th workshop with additional examples and think through some of your assignments. Also, I see really highlight focusing on what I refer to as the GOO, the goals, outcomes, and objectives. That GOO you want to stick with students. What are they? And how often do we also unintentionally throw in extraneous information? So if we're in a college algebra class again, and your goal is to have them calculate x plus 3 equals 4. Now, we can do it as a written equation. Sometimes, though, we do it in the form of a word problem. What that requires is not only for the student to understand how to calculate the material, they also have to understand how to read. They have to understand how to interpret symbols. When we're talking about 4 oranges, what exactly is that? If you're adding apples and oranges. The goal is to really focus on what the specific objective is that you're trying to get students to learn and that you want to stick. The goo. Some additional classroom strategies, provide information in multiple formats. We talked about this a little bit, but how, is there something that we can do, for example, if we're teaching someone, I'll do really something I can't do, and that's bake. How do we teach someone to bake a cake? And I'm selecting that one because I'm hoping that it's not something that someone teaches here. And well, think about it. If you can't make a chocolate torte, how can we teach students to do that? Well, we can talk about it. We can tell them the steps and the direction. If you're me, you're going to forget by step 2 what step 1 is. We could also give it to them in written form so they can go back to it. Another way to do it is we can give them pictures of combining different things. How much time? If you're looking at the back of anything microwavable like I do, now they have the picture of the microwave with the time on it that you actually have to put onto the microwave. They're using multiple ways of conveying information. Another thing to consider is offer processing time. You might be saying, what is that? And I'll give you an example from my own teaching. When I'm up teaching my class, sometimes I'll ask a question and I'll look around the room, and as the instructor, I start getting nervous if it takes a couple seconds for someone to respond. And then there are those days where it takes 5 seconds for someone to respond, but it feels like 5 minutes of me sitting there waiting, hoping that they get it. In which case I jump in and I give them the answer. There are some students that, you need time for processing information and thinking it through. And I encourage you, whether it's an assignment, whether it's an in-class exercise, that some of this processing time or these pauses are even more important than the student actually getting it right. When students are processing, one of the things that they're doing is they're working through problems, some more slowly than others. But what they do in that time is also figure out where exactly is it that they're having the disconnect. Where is the point through working through a problem or working through thinking about an issue where it starts to not make sense, where that connection is not being made? What can happen once they know that is they can ask questions. They can ask questions for clarifications, not just that they don't know it and you move on, but they'll be able to articulate sometimes where it is that they're getting held up. And you can really better help them in those situations. The final classroom strategy is really to make the implicit explicit. For a lot of neurodivergent students, we make assumptions. We make assumptions about what they know. We do the same thing about college students in general, what they know. They should know how to study. They should know when I say edit your paper, what that means. A lot of our students don't. Similarly, a lot of our students don't know, a lot of these college level terms that we use. If you're an instructor, working with high school students, a lot of the terms differ between college and high school. Making sure that we're being explicit about the terms that we're using, define them, talk about them, make sure that students know what you mean when you say edit a paper. Well, we need you to focus in on the spelling of the words, making sure that you know what the punctuation should be. And if you're uncertain about what punctuation is and how it's used, here are the resources that are available to you, to get support in that area. Oftentimes we just make assumptions. And for neurodivergent students, sometimes those assumptions can lead to challenges or failures in the moment, but also long term. Because in a lot of our disciplines in higher education, things build on one another. It's not just okay, you didn't figure that out. We'll get to the net. We'll do the next thing, and you'll be all good. Things have a way of building, and if you miss out on step one, step 2 through 99 are going to be a lot more challenging. So with that, I come to the end of the presentation, but I'm really excited to hear about what some of your questions are. Man, what are you thinking of? What are things that you're wrestling with right now, or things that you're like, I need a little information about that to make that stick or to truly understand it. And like I said, I will give you a pause. I will allow you to have some of that wait time to think through some of these questions. But in the meantime, I'm hoping that there might be some in the Q&A that I can start with. So I'm going to stop sharing just so I can actually see some faces.
So I'm
There you
not seeing any questions in the chat yet, but folks, feel free to either unmute and ask, or if you'd like to enter it in the chat, I can read them out for Adam.
I have a question, Adam.
Certainly.
Overall, what would you say is the most often question that you are asked about neurodiversity?
The question that I'm asked a lot is, well, I mean, this is all well and good, but one of the challenges that I have is in the moment. When if I'm working in a classroom and a student has a meltdown, they're autistic or they have a mental health disability and have a meltdown in the moment. What do I do?
Mm.
And so that's sort of that classroom management, behavior management type stuff. And there are a couple of suggestions that I have for that one. One, I mean, it's hopefully by that point, you've developed somewhat of a rapport with the student. I mean, you at least, hopefully it's not the first day this is happening, but it is, sometimes it does. But if you do have that rapport, I mean, what I suggest is, going up to the student, talking in a very calm, soothing voice, because what will happen is that they will mirror your anxiety. I mean, if you're upset and frantic over it, they're gonna parallel that, because that's what humans do in moments of crisis. They look at the folks around them for what to do. So talking in a calm, a relaxed voice, and then ask curious questions. Say, and you can make a statement. I can tell that, sort of that counseling idea. I can tell you're really stressed out right now. How can I help? What might help you reduce some of the stress that you're feeling? And having some of those more curious questions, because oftentimes what we find is neurodivergent students, just like any student, really have the answer. They may not know how to verbalize it, they may not know how to articulate it, but when prompted with the right question, they can think through it and they'll know the answer. Now, sometimes, if you don't have a rapport, it can be a little bit more challenging, because if it's the first day in that moment, you're still, for no fault of your own, you're a threat. You're the person that has the power in that relationship. So in those types of situations, one of the things that I suggest is, I use again that low, slow counselor voice and say, I can tell these are my observations. I'm not going to interpret your mood, but what I can see is that, you're wringing your hands. You look visibly stressed. Again, how can I support you? I'm here for you. Do you need to get a drink of water? Do you want to take a moment? All those things are okay. Now, if it gets a little bit, if it's more, sometimes, there is emotional, physicality with it. And I don't mean necessarily hitting or harming someone, but one of the things that in particular autistic people look for is sometimes sensory response. So they might pound a desk or something like that because they're looking for the pressure back. They're looking for a physical sensation. But that can be threatening. Behavior is what it is. So again, talking it out. When you do that, when you do pound your fist on the desk, it appears to other people, and it appears to me to be threatening. Is that the intent? Ask those curious questions, and that can get at the root cause of it. Oftentimes the statement is, no, that wasn't what I was intending. But so helping people find words or ways to express their emotions through asking questions. And then also know your resources. Know who's available to help you. Because we're not all powerful in these situations. We're not expected to be all knowing about every possible thing that could go on. But knowing who we can go to for support, that's really the thing. That's the key. So here,
Thank you.
I see some questions there.
There's a couple questions that came in regarding dyslexia and how it may be discovered mid-semester. So how do you quickly recover and help a student get back on track? There's also a side note about not calling it out, and as it may cause embarrassment.
Certainly, dyslexia is an interesting one because oftentimes, as the instructor, unless we get a accommodation that flat out says what it is, or the student tells us, and generally accommodation letters will not tell you what a person's disability is. A lot of it is just, we're looking at and we think it might be dyslexia. I don't know. If we're thinking someone is struggling with reading, or sometimes dyslexia, you actually are struggling with writing. That's how it manifests. That's one of the ways it manifests with my son. Has nothing to do with his. Dyslexia is for him is a reading one, but it impacts his ability to write significantly. What happens is, if it's mid-semester, knowing the resources that are available to you. We can't, as instructors, we can't diagnose someone. That's beyond our expertise. But if someone comes up to you and says, I'm really struggling with my writing or my reading, knowing the resources on campus that can support them. If there is a writing center or tutoring, and making referrals to those supports. If we do, if they're like, I think I might be something more than that, referring them to disabilities or accessibility services who, they can't diagnose someone, but they might be able to give them a good referral to someone in the local area who might be able to work with them. Generally you don't want to call it out and say, hey, you in the second row, I think you might be dyslexic. That's probably not the best approach to it. But if you notice something, it's fair to say to someone, I've been noticing you've been pull them aside or talk with them after class, saying, I've been noticing that you've been struggling a little bit with this. Is that something you've experienced before? Sometimes they'll say, this has just been an awful semester for me. My kids are going crazy. It's at home. Having problems with a girlfriend, what have you. It could be a myriad of things impacting their academics. Or they could say, it's something that's been challenging me for years, or it's been something that's just challenging me. Big time right now, and I can't understand why. At that point, it might say, there are a couple of options. One could be maybe you just need to work with a writing center or tutoring, and they can be helpful. But if you think it's something a little bit more pervasive, again, let me connect you with this person that I know from accessibility resources. A good way to make a referral is oftentimes if you know the names of people. It's a lot less scary to be referred to Jane in this office than it is to the office itself. It's even if Jane isn't the one to help them, having someone to say, okay, it's a real person. It's not this scary thing that I sort of the wizard behind the curtain. It's an authentic human being who I can talk with. So those are a couple of strategies, but also know that, I mean, even for neurodivergent people, even if they never disclose their disability, I mean, they don't want to deal with the stigma. Good resources, something that's predictive of college success and retention, are using what are referred to as the universally available resources. The academic advising, if there's an academic support center, writing center, using those services. Those are predictors of success for neurodivergent people, even if they don't disclose to disability or accessibility services. So if you can't get them to do the one thing or they don't want to, know that there are other things that can support them.
Adam, I just want to be mindful of time.
Yep.
I see we're at the 4 o'clock mark. We want to thank you very much for your time and your expertise today. It's greatly appreciated. I want to echo what Mary posted in the chat. Adam will be with us in person May 14th, and it'll be a continuation, from my understanding, of today's work. So please there's a link in the schedule. If you have questions about it, please reach out to Mary Wiseman or myself. And we look forward to seeing you again, Adam. Thank you so much.
Same here. It's going to be a fun May 14th.
Yeah, fun May Day.
Absolutely.